Now I'm going to talk about attribution biases. So in the previous video, I explained what attributions are and the two basic types of attributions, dispositional and situational. And now we're going to talk about how we don't always come up with our attributions in a fair and consistent manner. We do have biases. If you're familiar with that term bias, when you are not neutral, when you have a leaning, you have a preference of some sort. And so we're going to talk about three different types of biases. The first one we're going to talk about is the fundamental attribution error, which I sometimes see people abbreviated as FAE. I'll probably just say the whole phrase. But the fundamental attribution error, this is where you have a tendency to explain other people's behavior as dispositional and rather than situational. Now, there's a reason for this. You don't know other people's situation. You don't have the full access to all of the different factors that might influence someone else's behavior. So it is much easier. It's so much easier to assume that, well, that's something to do with the person. You don't know about their situation. You don't know nearly as much about their situation as you do about your own situation. So you tend to come up with dispositional attributions for other people's behavior. Now, we also have a bias, the actor-observer bias. All right. With this bias, this has to do with whether you are the one engaging in the behavior or the one who is observing, witnessing, watching the behavior. So with the actor-observer bias, sorry, I had to pause for a second. Stuff was happening in the environment here, distracting me. All right, actor-observer bias. Again, we talked about the fundamental attribution error. You don't have as much information about others. All right. If you are the actor in a situation, if you are the person doing the behavior that is being explained, that someone is attributing causes to, you tend to focus on the situation because you know more about the situation. So let's say you get in a car accident. All right, you get in a car accident. You are going to be familiar with all of the things that are happening. You were the one that got in the accident. Let's say you were the one that's identified as at fault. You're going to know that the weather was really bad for driving at the moment. You're going to know that things are more crowded than normal. You're going to know about all sorts of additional factors, that there's extra noise from construction and all, and you're going to know that the person just seemed to come out of nowhere. Whereas other people, witnesses to that accident, they're not going to know the full situation. They're just going to see, hey, that person hit that other person. That person caused an accident. So they're going to lean towards situational attributions. When you're the observer, I said situation, I meant to say dispositional. When you're the observer, you lean towards dispositional attributions. So, because that observer, they're an other. So you'd be like, that person must be a bad driver. That person must be a reckless driver. They must not be careful. All right. So, and who is right? You never know without getting more information. But we do have this tendency. When you are the one engaging in the behavior, you have access to more information, and you often come up with situational attributions. The observer, they're more likely to come up with dispositional attributions. Now, we also have the self-serving bias. What do you think that one has to do with self-serving? What would that mean? We like to make ourselves look good. We like to feel good about ourselves. So let's say you do poorly on a test. It could be because you're just not that bright, but would you want to admit that to yourself? Would you want to focus on factors like that? You're gonna focus on things like, well, that professor is really hard. That professor is really mean. The professor doesn't like me. This class is set up unfairly. You're more, there's a temptation to come up with those sorts of attributions because they make you feel better about yourself. It's self-serving. It's protective in some way. And so, self-serving bias, you take personal credit for your own successes. You do well on that test. It's because I'm brilliant and I worked hard. All right? But you blame your failures on external events beyond your control. It's protective. This self-serving bias is protective. It's protective of your self-image. We don't like to see ourselves in a negative light. So we do have that tendency to absolutely take credit for our successes, but to divert our blame for failures or things that, didn't go as well as we wanted them to go. All right, so start thinking about your own life. Just try to think of examples where you exhibited the fundamental attribution error, or an actor-observer bias, or the self-serving bias. If you do find examples in your own life, you should not feel bad about yourself. Everything that we talk about when we talk about social cognition involves human tendencies. It's not just that selfish people do this. It's not just that people who aren't so bright and don't understand people do this. It's not a certain type of person who engages in this sort of faulty thinking. All humans do this. All humans have a tendency to be a little irrational at times. There's a reason for that. That we do this, first of all, to simplify a complicated world and to make ourselves feel better so that we can have the strength to function in the complicated world. So when I ask you to think of examples, I don't do that to get you to feel bad about yourself. We all have them. We all have the examples. The point is that we all do this. The way to have awareness of what we do is to admit that, yeah, we all do these things. We all do these things that perhaps don't reflect the most logical and rational of thinking.